And here we go. Slugfest Wizard, here to do my predictions, my picks for UFC 129, Georges St. Pierre versus Jake Shields, among other fighters, of course. Let's go. Okay, the UFC on April 30th, this Saturday, of course, is going to put on its biggest event yet, record-breaking in Ontario, Canada, and Toronto. They are going to host in the Rogers Centre UFC 129 in front of a record-selling crowd of 55,000 tickets to watch the best 170-pound fighter in the world and the best 145-pound fighter in the world. Let's go. Or, wait a minute. Yeah, 145 pounds. Okay. But before I get into this, there's something I wanted to just talk about. Before I get down to the card, I've been listening to the Ground and Pound podcast show on my iPod right now with Mark Radulich and Saudi Kamer and Jeffrey Harris, and there's something that Jeff Harris said that was a bit concerning to me right now, because we just the last UFC event to take place on TV was UFC Fight Night 24, in which Phil Davis scored a unanimous decision victory over Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, and people are calling Phil Davis the next best thing, or the man to beat John Jones, and people want to be right about that again. I just wanted to get on the record and say this, that even though, I'm not counting Phil Davis out, because he looked he was impressive considering the quality of opponent that he beat, but I was not that impressed by his performance, in the words of GSP. And just to put it out there, if Phil Davis fought John Jones next month from now, after John Jones heals up with his hand injury, Phil Davis will lose under 15 minutes with either to submission or TKO. So, okay, from the top. What can you say about Georges St. Pierre? He has the best 170-pound fighter on earth right now. Great. He just has everything that it takes to be a champ and to have remained in that position for as long as he has right now. You know, third-degree black belt in Kyokushin karate, a great work ethic that is reminiscent of a world-class Olympic athlete, and never-ending cardio, black belt in Gaido Jiu-Jitsu, and a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well. Studied Kyokushin karate, of course. Even though he never wrestled in high school or college, he is probably the best takedown artist, and he is coming off of a dominant victory over Josh Koscheck, in which he basically lit up Josh Koscheck's face and busted up his eye nearly into blindness for 25 minutes. He's not the best at finishing fights, but the man really can't lose, it seems like. Or that's how it appears. He fights to not lose. And has not lost, actually, since April 7th, 2007. Okay. And he is fighting Jake Shields, who has not lost in 6 years, is on a 15-fight winning streak. In those wins... Well, first, let's talk about Jake Shields. He practiced submission wrestling when he was during his grade school days, and also studied kickboxing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, even though his striking is nowhere near the level that it needs to be to challenge someone like Georges St. Pierre, so I just wanted to say that. Jake Shields showed up at the UFC 121 and was just barely able to secure a split decision victory over Martin Kampman. And he looked really... He was basically gassed by the time the third round was over, and somehow Martin Kampman let that fight slip out of his fingers. Maybe he could have won it. So Georges St. Pierre, Jake Shields, due to the weight cut, his conditioning looked really questionable. But before that, he beat Dan Henderson in the upset of the year. He also beat Jason Mayhem Miller, Robbie Lawler, Paul Daly. He beat Yushin Okami and Carlos Condit in the same night. He also beat Tobi Yamada and Dave Manet. His last loss was to Akiri Kokuchi. I'm probably butchering that spelling. So he also got the Pan American, won the gold medal at the Pan American Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Championships in 2005 and the bronze medal at the ADCC Submission Wrestling World Championships. So he is a legitimate threat to George St. Pierre's welterweight crown. I still can't see him winning when the time comes. Unless, of course, George St. Pierre shows up and gets lazy and leaves his neck out there in a takedown, which I don't think he will. I think George St. Pierre will just keep this fight on his feet and pick Jake Shields apart with strikes en route to either a decision or possibly a corner stoppage, because they've decided that Jake Shields has either been jabbed or leg kicked too much. So I wish Jake Shields the best of luck. By the way, the Iceman and Chael Sonnen both pick Jake Shields to win tomorrow, so never know. He has a submission fighter's chance, particularly with the guillotine, so I've talked about that enough. Let's move on. Next fight. Fellow Canadian Mark Hominick, a really nice, crisp striker who has incorporated Western boxing into his game plan, and who had a good win over George Roop in his debut, will be taking on arguably the strongest and the fastest featherweight in the world right now, Jose Aldo. I think his name is pronounced Jose, not Jose, as they keep on saying it. But Jose Aldo only has one loss on his record. That was to Luciano Azevedo by rear naked choke. Since then, he's been smashing people since then. He tore through Manny Gambarian, Uriah Faber, Mike Brown, Cub Swanson, took him down in 8 seconds. I see this being a very difficult fight for Mark Hominick, particularly because he does not check leg kicks, and sometimes he keeps his hands too low, and that's not going to be good against a brutal killer, almost, in the form of Jose Aldo. So Hominick does have a good chance, but I see Aldo winning this by second round knockout. Next one, Vladimir Matyushenko, longtime MMA veteran, taking on Jason Brills. Let's talk about Jason Brills, NCAA Division II wrestling, because we're just going to talk about this briefly. He's been in the game for a while too. Brills had lost to Elliot Marshall, but he also has a win over Tim Boach and Eric Schaefer. I thought that he did enough to defeat Antonio Hajiro Nogueira at UFC 114. He showed a lot in that fight. And I think he's going to be able to defeat Vladimir Matyushenko, who, he coming off of his loss to John Jones, that's nothing to really get mad about right now. He also lost to Nogueira at Affliction Day of Wrestling. So, but other than that, he's got a decent-looking record, 25 wins, 5 losses, and he lost back in the day to Tito Ortiz back in 2001. So what I think is going to happen in this fight, Vladimir Matyushenko is good, but sometimes he is slower than he needs to be. Sometimes he waits too long to get the job done during a scramble or whether it's a brawl on the feet. So I see Jason Brills out-wrestling him and being a slightly more conditioned athlete en route to winning a underwhelming unanimous decision. Next fight, okay, wow. Randy the Natural Couture taking on Lyoto the Dragon Machida in what Randy Couture has said will be his last fight. I'm going to talk about that in the next video. Keep up with it, guys.